The massive alien warrior had been standing in the same spot for 300 years. Nobody knew his name. Nobody dared ask. He was just there, like a statue made of nightmares, towering 12 feet above the crowded walkways of Nexus Station. The creature looked like death itself had put on armor. His body was wrapped in some kind of living metal that shifted and moved like it was breathing. The armor changed colors in the light, going from deep black to dark purple, sometimes catching the station's artificial sunlight and throwing it back like broken glass. His face was hidden behind a helmet that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. Nexus Station was the busiest place in the known galaxy. Every day, thousands of ships docked here. Traders from 100 different worlds set up their stalls in the massive central plaza. Diplomats held meetings in the upper levels. Families took vacations here, kids pressing their faces against the viewing windows to watch the stars. But everyone gave the warrior a wide circle of empty space. The Galactic Council had tried everything to move him. They sent their best negotiators first, thinking maybe they could talk to him. Those brave souls got within about 10 feet before something hit them like a wall of pure terror. They ran screaming, some of them never quite the same afterward. Next, they tried the military approach. Elite soldiers from different worlds, beings who had faced down space pirates and survived alien plagues, all walked confidently toward the motionless figure. They made it the same distance before their courage cracked like thin ice. One Craxy general, famous for never retreating in battle, later said it felt like staring into the mouth of a black hole that was staring back. They even brought in psychics and mind readers, hoping to understand what was happening. The mental specialists got the worst of it. Whatever was coming from the warrior's mind hit them so hard that 3 of them had to be hospitalized. One poor Telari mystic claimed she could still feel the warrior's presence in her dreams months later. After 50 years of failed attempts, the council simply gave up. They rerouted the foot traffic. Vendors learned to set up their stalls at least 20 feet away. Parents grabbed their children's hands a little tighter when walking through that section of the plaza. The creature became part of the station's landscape, like a very dangerous tourist attraction that nobody actually wanted to visit. Local kids grew up with stories about him. Some said he was the last soldier from an ancient war, still fighting battles that ended before their grandparents were born. Others whispered that he was waiting for something, though nobody could guess what. The older residents, the ones who had been on the station the longest, remembered when he first appeared. One day the spot was empty. The next day he was there, and he had never moved since. Dr. Benjamin Clark had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the archaeological community knew about the mysterious warrior on Nexus Station. But Ben had spent 30 years digging up the remains of dead civilizations, and he had learned that legends usually had more bark than bite. When his transport ship finally docked after 3 weeks in hyperspace, Ben was tired, hungry, and focused on finding his hotel room. He had come here to research the Vorthak Empire, an ancient race that had supposedly ruled this part of the galaxy thousands of years ago. The station's archaeological library was supposed to have the best collection of Vorthak artifacts outside of the core worlds. Ben stepped off the ship carrying nothing but a beat-up canvas bag and 3 decades worth of experience with things that were supposed to be impossible. He had seen crystal cities that sang in harmonies no human throat could produce. He had touched machines that still worked after being buried for 1,000,000 years. He had walked through tombs that bent space and time like rubber. As he made his way through the plaza toward the hotel district, he noticed a crowd moving in a strange pattern. People float around something like water around a stone, but he couldn't see what they were avoiding. Then the crowd parted for a moment, and Ben saw him. The warrior stood perfectly still in the center of the plaza, and Ben felt nothing. No fear, no urge to run. Just the same feeling he got when he found a new dig site, that electric curiosity that had driven him to spend his life exploring the unknown. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone looked at the ancient alien warrior and smiled. Ben Clark wasn't the type to rush into anything. 30 years of digging up ancient mysteries had taught him patience. So for nearly a week, he did what he did best. He watched and he learned. Every morning, Ben would grab his coffee from the little cafe on level 7 and find a spot in the plaza where he could observe the warrior without getting too close. He picked different locations each day, sometimes sitting on the benches near the fountain, other times pretending to browse the souvenir shops that ring the open space. While everyone else hurried past with their eyes down, Ben studied the figure like he was examining a rare artifact. And that's when he started noticing things that 300 years of terrified observers had missed. The warrior was breathing. It was so subtle that you had to watch for 10 or 15 minutes to catch it, but his chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Ben timed it. One breath every 43 seconds, like he was in some kind of deep meditation. The armor was even more fascinating up close. What Ben had first taken for solid metal was actually more like a living shell. Tiny patterns moved across its surface, flowing like slow rivers of light. During the day's cycles, when the station's artificial sun was bright, the armor gleamed deep purple with hints of silver. But when the lights dimmed for night cycle, it shifted to midnight blue, so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Ben spent his evenings in the station's research library, diving deep into everything they had about the Vorthak Empire. What he found painted a picture of a civilization unlike anything he'd studied before. The Vorthak weren't just warriors. They were warrior poets, warrior philosophers. Their entire culture was built around something they called the honor path, a code of conduct that made ancient human chivalry look simple by comparison. They believed that true strength came not from winning battles, but from facing impossible odds with dignity intact. The few surviving Vorthak texts spoke of warriors who would stand vigil for decades, waiting for the right moment to act. They had rituals where a single guardian would protect sacred places or objects for lifetimes, sustained by nothing but will and duty. Most interesting of all, the Vorthak had apparently vanished from the galaxy not through conquest or disease, but by choice. The last record suggested they had simply walked away from their empire when they decided their work was done, leaving behind empty cities and unanswered questions. On his 7th day of observation, Ben made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else on the station. He walked straight toward the warrior. The fear hit him like a physical wall at exactly 10 feet, just like everyone had said it would. But Ben had spent years exploring tombs and ruins that were supposed to be cursed, places where other archaeologists claimed to feel watched by hostile spirits. He'd learned to recognize the difference between real danger and psychological pressure. This felt like pressure, not threat, like standing at the edge of a cliff, scary, but not necessarily deadly. Ben sat down cross-legged on the cold metal floor of the plaza, close enough to touch the invisible barrier of dread, but not quite crossing it. The crowds gave them both an even wider berth now, but Ben didn't care. He had work to do. He started talking. "I've been reading about your people," Ben said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet around them. "Found some of your poetry on a dead world called Kepler 442b. Beautiful stuff. There was one piece carved into a temple wall about honor, being the only treasure that death can't steal." The warrior didn't respond, but Ben hadn't expected him to. He kept talking anyway, sharing his discoveries like he was giving a lecture to an invisible classroom. He talked about the Vorthak cities he'd explored, their architecture designed around principles of harmony and strength. He described artifacts that seemed to be weapons but were actually ceremonial items used in coming-of-age rituals. He read aloud from his translation of Vorthak philosophy, stumbling over the alien concepts but trying his best to capture their meaning. Hours passed. Station security came by twice to check on him, but Ben waved them away. This was just another day at the office for an archaeologist, sitting with ancient things and trying to understand their stories. By the 2nd day, word had spread throughout the station. The crazy human was actually talking to the warrior. Some people started taking detours just to see the odd spectacle of someone sitting calmly in the terror zone. Ben brought his lunch and ate it while discussing Vorthak military tactics. He read from his notebook about their belief that true victory meant finding solutions that honor both winners and losers. On the 3rd day of his one-sided conversation, something changed. Ben was in the middle of explaining how Vorthak architecture reflected their philosophy when he felt it, the sensation of being watched by something intelligent. He looked up, and for the first time in 300 years, the ancient warrior's eyes were open and focused directly on him. Those eyes were the color of distant stars, ancient and tired but still burning with inner fire. When they met Ben's gaze, the human archaeologist felt a shock of recognition, as if he was looking at someone he'd known his whole life. The warrior's voice, when it finally came, was like distant thunder rolling across a vast plain. When the warrior finally spoke, his voice was like hearing thunder from inside a mountain. The sound rolled across the plaza in waves, deep and ancient and full of power that made the metal deck plates vibrate under Ben's feet. "You are not afraid," the warrior said, and Ben could tell these were the first words spoken by this being in a very, very long time. All around the plaza, the universal translators that everyone carried started sparking and smoking. The little devices that could handle 1,000 different alien languages were completely overwhelmed by whatever the warrior was speaking. People grabbed their translators as they overheated, some of them actually catching fire. But somehow, Ben understood every word perfectly. "Should I be?" Ben asked, and he genuinely meant it as a question. The warrior studied him for a long moment with those ancient star-colored eyes. When he spoke again, it was in perfect English, though his voice still carried that deep, rumbling quality that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than his throat. "I have been waiting," the warrior said slowly, as if remembering how to form words after centuries of silence, waiting for someone who could approach without fear clouding their judgment, someone who could hear truth without running from it. Ben shifted on the cold metal floor, trying to get more comfortable. "Waiting for what exactly?" "I am Vordergrundthaler." The name rolled off his tongue like ancient music. "In your language, it means he who stands between. But you may call me Thomas." He paused, seeming almost amused. "I learned your names from the broadcast your ships carry. Thomas seems appropriate." Ben blinked. "You've been listening to our radio signals? For the past 50 of your years, since your species began reaching the outer systems. You are interesting, chaotic in ways that most species grow out of, but also capable of surprising wisdom." Thomas moved for the first time in 3 centuries, raising one armor hand to gesture at the crowds that watched from a safe distance. "They feel the weight of what I carry and flee. Fear is a reasonable response. I am the last guardian of something that should terrify any thinking being." "Guardian of what?" "The key to weapons that could crack world in half. The knowledge of how to fight things that eat galaxies for breakfast. The responsibility of deciding who is worthy to wield power that could reshape the universe." Thomas's eyes seemed to look through Ben to something far away. "I am the last of my kind, and I carry the last hope against the darkness that consumed my people." Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's air conditioning. "Consumed them how?" "The Devourers," Thomas said, and the name carried such weight that several people in the distant crowd suddenly looked around nervously, as if something had whispered in their ears. "They come from the spaces between galaxies. They do not conquer or colonize. They simply consume everything, matter, energy, life, thought itself. They ate my empire, my people, my entire civilization, leaving nothing but empty space where billions of worlds once turned." "But you survived." "I was chosen to escape, to carry this burden, to wait and watch until someone came who could bear what I carry." Thomas leaned forward slightly, and Ben could see his reflection in the warrior's polished armor. "The field of fear you felt, it was not meant to harm. It was a test. Those driven by greed flee, because they sense power they cannot have. Those driven by hatred flee, because they sense responsibility they cannot bear. Those driven by simple fear flee, because they are not ready for what is coming." "And what am I driven by?" Ben asked. "Curiosity, understanding, the desire to preserve knowledge and protect what is precious." Thomas nodded slowly. "In 300 years, you are the first to approach with clean intentions, the first to sit and listen rather than demand or threaten or flee." Ben was quiet for a moment, processing this. Around them, the normal bustle of the plaza had ground to a halt. Thousands of beings from dozens of species stood watching this impossible conversation. "You said something is coming," Ben said finally. Thomas's armor suddenly shifted color, going from midnight blue to deep red. "I have felt them stirring at the galaxy's edge for the past decade. The same hunger, the same emptiness that devoured my world. They have found this galaxy, and they are coming. How long do we have? Time moves differently for beings like the Devourers. They could arrive tomorrow or in 100 years. But they will come, and when they do, Thomas stood up, rising to his full 12-foot height. Your species has something mine did not. You carry both great capacity for evil and great capacity for good. Most species in the galaxy are either peaceful or warlike. You are both, and that contradiction makes you uniquely suited for what must be done. As if the universe had been listening to their conversation, alarms suddenly began blaring throughout Nexus Station. The emergency broadcast system crackled to life, and a panicked voice filled the plaza. All stations, all ships priority alert. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures at the Galactic Rim. Unidentified vessels of unprecedented size are approaching our sector. Repeat, we have confirmation of unknown vessels entering our galaxy. Thomas looked down at Ben with something that might have been a sad smile. It appears we no longer have the luxury of time, he said. The test is over. Now comes the real challenge. The hidden chambers beneath Nexus Station were older than the station itself. Thomas led Ben through corridors that seemed to have been carved from single pieces of black stone, their walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The air down here felt thick and heavy, like breathing liquid starlight. My people built this place long before your species learned to make fire, Thomas explained as they walked deeper into the ancient structure. It was meant to be a vault, a place to keep things too dangerous for the universe above. Ben ran his hand along one of the walls, feeling the smooth stone pulse under his fingers like a slow heartbeat. How many people know this is down here? Until today? Only me? Thomas stopped at a massive door that seemed to be made of the same living metal as his armor. The station builders found the entrance centuries ago, but the fear field I projected kept everyone away. They simply built around what they could not understand. The door recognized Thomas and slid open silently, revealing a chamber that took Ben's breath away. The room was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. But what dominated the space was a crystal in its center, a structure the size of a small building that pulsed with inner light, like a captured star. As they entered, Ben became aware that they weren't alone. Beings from dozens of species stood around the edges of the chamber, keeping their distance from the crystal. He recognized ambassadors from the Galactic Council, military leaders from various worlds, even some of the traders from the plaza above. Word travels fast, Thomas said, noticing Ben's surprise. When the last Guardian finally moves after 3 centuries, people notice. A tall, blue-skinned diplomat from the Arcturus system stepped forward nervously. Guardian Thomas, our fleets are mobilizing, but our weapons barely scratch the Devourer's scouts. If what you say is true, if there are millions more coming, your weapons cannot touch them, Thomas said simply. The Devourers exist partially outside normal space. Conventional weapons pass through them like light through glass. He gestured to the crystal. This is Eternity Key. It can reach them where they truly exist, turn their own hunger against them, but it requires a price that few are willing to pay. Ben approached the crystal slowly. Up close, it was even more beautiful and terrifying. Patterns of light moved through its core like living galaxies, and he could swear he heard something like music coming from deep within its structure. What kind of price? Ben asked. Truth, Thomas replied. The key bonds with whoever touches it, but first it shows them everything. Every dark moment in their species' history, every failure, every act of cruelty or selfishness. Most beings cannot face their own darkness and remain sane. A reptilian commander from the outer colonies hissed nervously. My people tried something similar once. The volunteers were broken mentally, reduced to babbling children. Your people, like most species, chose either civilization or barbarism and stuck with it, Thomas said. Humans are different. You carry both light and shadow in equal measure, which makes you either perfectly suited for this trial or guaranteed to be destroyed by it. Ben looked around at the assembled aliens, all watching him with expressions ranging from hope to horror. The weight of what Thomas was asking hit him fully. Not just his own life, but potentially the sanity of his entire species was at stake. If I don't do this, what happens? The Devourers consume everything in this galaxy, just as they consume mine. Trillions of lives, thousands of civilizations, all reduced to empty space and forgotten dreams. Ben took a deep breath and placed his hands on the crystal. The pain hit him like being struck by lightning while drowning in fire. Suddenly, he wasn't Ben Clark anymore. He was every human who had ever lived, experiencing every moment of suffering his species had ever caused. He felt the rage of every war, the desperation of every famine caused by human greed. He experienced slavery, genocide, the casual cruelty that people inflicted on each other for resources or religion or simple hate. He lived through the Holocaust, felt the bombs falling on Hiroshima, experienced every moment when humans had chosen power over compassion. But the crystal wasn't finished. It showed him the victims' pain, the children crying for parents who would never come home, the last thought of soldiers dying in foreign mud, the quiet desperation of people watching their world burn, while others profited from the flames. Ben screamed until his throat felt raw, but the visions kept coming. Every dark chapter in human history crashed over him in waves, threatening to drown him in guilt and horror. Then, just when he thought he would break, something else began to filter through the darkness. A soldier sharing his rations with enemy prisoners. A woman hiding refugees in her basement while bombs fell outside. Firefighters running into burning buildings to save strangers. Doctors working without pay in war zones. Teachers staying late to help struggling students. Ordinary people making extraordinary sacrifices for no reward except the knowledge that it was right. He saw humans at their worst, but also humans at their best. The same species that had created concentration camps had also created hospitals. The same hands that built weapons also built homes for the homeless, wrote poetry, painted beauty onto blank canvases. The crystal showed him that humanity's greatest weakness, their capacity for both good and evil, was also their greatest strength. Other species had chosen sides in the cosmic battle between creation and destruction. Humans had chosen to fight that battle within themselves every single day. When the visions finally ended, Ben found himself on his knees in front of the crystal, tears streaming down his face. But he was still Ben Clark, still sane, still whole. The crystal's light now flowed through him like liquid fire, and he could feel connections forming in his mind to things he'd never imagined. Somewhere in space, ancient weapons that had slept for millennia began to wake up. Defense networks older than Earth's sun started coming online. And in his head, Ben could hear them all, waiting for his command. Thomas placed a massive armored hand on Ben's shoulder. "The network recognizes you," the ancient warrior said, and for the first time since Ben had met him, Thomas smiled. "Now show them what it truly means to be human." The moment Ben's consciousness fully merged with the Eternity Key, the galaxy changed forever. Across 50 star systems, ancient weapons that had been sleeping since before Earth's sun was born suddenly blazed to life. Massive energy cannons hidden in asteroid belts powered up with a hum that could be felt across light years. Defense platforms buried in the hearts of dead worlds began transmitting targeting data to each other in languages that predated most civilizations. Ben could feel all of it flowing through his mind like a river of liquid fire. Every weapon, every sensor, every piece of Vorthack technology scattered across the galaxy was now connected to him, waiting for his command. The Devourer fleet was already here, through the weapon network sensors. Ben could see them clearly for the first time. They weren't ships in any sense that most species would understand. They were more like massive, living shadows that moved through space like oil through water. Each one was the size of a small moon, their surfaces rippling with dark energy that seemed to bend light around them. There were thousands of them, maybe millions, spreading to the outer systems like a plague of living darkness. Wherever they passed, stars dimmed and planets went silent. They weren't just destroying things. They were erasing them, leaving behind empty space that felt cold and dead even to distant sensors. Ben's first instinct was to fight. The weapons at his command could crack planets in half, turn entire solar systems into expanding clouds of superheated gas. He could feel the network's eagerness, ancient war machines that had been built for exactly this moment. But as he prepared to unleash hell on the Devourer fleet, something stopped him. The visions from the crystal had shown him more than just human history. In those final moments, when the light had been flowing through him like starfire, he'd caught glimpses of something else. Something about the Devourers that even Thomas hadn't fully understood. They were hungry, yes. They consumed everything in their path. But Ben had seen deeper. passed their terrible appetite to the source of their need. They weren't eating matter and energy because they wanted to destroy. They were consuming connection itself. Every relationship, every bond between living things, every moment of understanding between different beings. They were feeding on the very idea of not being alone. And they were starving. Ben could see it now, looking at them through the network's enhanced sensors. The Devourers weren't conquerors or destroyers. They were refugees from the spaces between galaxies, places so empty and cold that nothing could survive there except by consuming everything it touched. They had been alone for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to exist without hunger. Instead of targeting the lead ships with planet-killing weapons, Ben did something that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He opened a communication channel and sent a message directly into the heart of the Devourer fleet. "You don't have to be alone anymore." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire Devourer armada stopped moving at once, their shadow ships hanging motionless in space, as if someone had hit a pause button on reality. Through the network, Ben could feel their hive mind recoiling from his message like someone touching a hot stove. For eons beyond counting, the Devourers had known only hunger and emptiness. The concept of genuine connection, of existing without consuming, was so foreign to them that it physically hurt to consider. But slowly, carefully, Ben felt something reach back. It wasn't words or images or anything that could be translated into normal language. It was pure emotion, raw and desperate and ancient beyond measure. The loneliness of entire civilizations condensed into a single cry that echoed across the void between stars. Ben opened his mind fully, letting the Devourer collective feel what it was like to be connected without consuming. He showed them memories of friendship, of love, of the simple joy of existing alongside other beings without needing to devour them. Through the weapon network, he broadcast the experiences of every species in the galaxy. The way Arcturians sang together in perfect harmony, how Centauri families raised their young in community groups, the complex dance of cooperation that kept places like Nexus Station running. The change wasn't instant. Eons of hunger couldn't be healed overnight. But gradually, ship by ship, the Devourer fleet began to change. Their shadow hulls started reflecting light instead of absorbing it. The dead zones they had created began to shimmer with new kinds of energy, not destructive but creative. In the weeks that followed, as the galaxy slowly came to terms with the fact that they were no longer facing extinction, Ben found himself serving as a translator between the Devourers and everyone else. It wasn't easy. Beings that had spent millions of years consuming everything they touched didn't immediately understand concepts like trade agreements or diplomatic immunity. But humans had always been good at finding common ground with impossible neighbors, and Ben was no exception. He helped establish the first communication protocols, worked out systems for the Devourers to contribute to galactic civilization without accidentally eating it, and slowly built bridges between former enemies. Thomas watched all of this with the satisfaction of someone whose impossible burden was finally being shared. The ancient warrior had carried the weight of the galaxy's survival for 3 centuries, and now he could finally rest. "Your watch is ended," Ben told him during one of their quiet conversations in the crystal chamber. Thomas smiled, his form already beginning to fade as the life force that had sustained him for so long finally found peace. "No, my friend, it is just beginning. But it's in better hands than mine ever were." As the last guardian of the Vortex faded into memory, Ben Clark became something entirely new. The first guardian of the galaxy where even hungriest darkness had learned to find light. And for the first time in cosmic history, the universe felt a little less lonely.